Talk 1240.
Would you call it a crime to fly a drone around? I mean, probably not. UAV, unmanned aerial vehicle. Would you call it a crime, a moral wrong to fly around one of these things in, say, your backyard? Probably not. So why then does there need to be a registry of any sort, really? I mean, there's not any crime being committed, because then you start getting into the area of potentiality. And potentiality does not really create crime. There's potential for crime to be committed, sure, but that does not mean that there is actual crime being committed. Again, we're talking about potentiality, which is not real crime. There might be a crime. That's crime prevention. And again, crime prevention is perhaps a worthy cause for a nonprofit, but not really the government's business. You could argue that it is. I would disagree, because you're wrong, but it's not. The government's job is not to prevent crimes from ever happening. Government's job is, actually, I guess the sheriff's job would be to enforce the law after a crime has been committed, because crime prevention is kind of it's wasted time, really. I mean, yeah, there are outreach programs, and I'm sure there are merits to that, but that's not really what we're doing here, right? We're talking about drones, and you can't prevent a crime by creating a registry. Okay, so I was talking to Eric Judd, who actually happens to run Sky Aerial Services here at Hot News Talk Radio. He's one of our big sponsors here. And the problem with the whole narrative is something that he pointed out that was a very good point, which is this. What's to stop you from flying your registered drone around an airport, flying it into an airplane, assuming you can regain control, flying it back to where you are and driving off? And would they ever catch you? Probably not, even if you had it registered. So even if this drone is registered in your name, even so, what if someone stole your drone and crashed it into a plane and then, drove off? So the drone's registered to you, but you have to prove that it was you who flew it. It's kind of like the whole idea about registering guns. And I know in Georgia and Tennessee, I believe you don't have to actually register a firearm. You don't. So even if, this gun is registered, let's assume you voluntarily, for some reason, register your firearm, and it gets used in a crime, the fact that it's registered to you isn't actually indicative of you having pulled the trigger in any way. So again, nothing's been proved other than this gun belongs to you. That doesn't prove that an actual crime has been committed. That just proves that you're smart at figuring out numbers because you read that this is registered to me. Big whoop. That doesn't mean anything. Same goes for drones. It doesn't actually mean anything that the drone is registered to me. It just creates another system to maintain, basically. There's more money to be funneled into this particular system that needs to be maintained. So then why not just make all drones government drones at that point? I mean, really, just have the government lease out drones to different people who want them, or you get licensed to use drones. After all, you already have to get licensed from the FAA and go through training to fly a drone commercially anyway. So you'd think they could register who has been an applicant for that particular program. They're already licensees. So you've got a license on the person flying the drone. Why register the drone then? It's the same deal with cars. We're all licensed to drive cars. Why register them? I mean, we can all drive cars around. I get the idea of license plates and everything, but at this point, you've already got the license. So why do we need to pay extra fees every few, months or years to keep the car registered? That just seems kind of frivolous at that point. Of course, it's all revenue generation, but it just seems silly. After all, why are we even paying for license plates anyway when you'd think that, gas tax or road tax or something would go into that? And they say, well, people paying for license plates puts money into the roads. Yeah, but I have a right to drive, don't I? You'd think. I'm getting this license under permission, right? You must get permission from the state in order to drive. And that seems a little bit ludicrous. I need to get permission from some sort of entity in order to drive, something I have to do to go to work. I have to get licensed to do that. And the funny thing is, I was a really good driver before I had a driver's license. Now, don't ask how I know that, but I was a really good driver before I got my driver's license. So why did I need a license just to prove, I guess, that I'm a really good driver? A driver's license serves no real practical purpose other than just to be an ID. It's to serve as an ID to prove who you are, essentially. And I've already got a passport card to do that for me, so I don't need another form of ID. What's really fun, by the way, is to buy cigars. Generally speaking, you have to prove that you are of a certain age. I generally sometimes look older than 18. Some days I don't. Some days I look 30, and some days I look 16. Depends on if I've shaved or not. It's weird, but I've bought, I may or may not have purchased cigars before. Nothing wrong with that, right? You're not going to say, oh, you buy cigars, you're going to hell. I bought cigars once, and many other times too. And they card me. And what's really fun to do is to use your passport card as your ID, because 9 times out of 10, they've never actually seen that before. They've never actually seen a passport card before, and they'll be sort of thrown by that. I mean, it's a legal ID. It is identification. It's actually federal ID at that point, too, because it's your passport card, which is, technically speaking, I would think the highest form of ID that a civilian can obtain, aside from like military contractor ID. So I'm showing them like the best ID. The feds believe that this is me, so you should too. Never mind the state with my driver's license. The feds believe this is me, so you should too. It's fun anyway. It's a really fun argument. I've even had to use it. Like, what? I need to see a driver's license, and I say, what? You don't believe the feds? That's me. It's fun. But anyway, no. So it's creating a drone registry seems completely frivolous. There's not really any sort of legit reasoning behind it. And I'm seeing articles now saying, from different newspapers and such saying, we need a drone registry immediately. It's urgent that we have a drone registry, says the FAA or what have you. Some agency believes that it's urgent we have a registry. Oh, boy. So a national register of drones and their owners, it should say and its owners, but whatever, is urgently needed, the U.S. Transport Secretary has said. Oh, Anthony Fox is the U.S. Transport Secretary, and he says that a task force has been set up to examine creating a record of drones and their users. And its users. The move comes after several reported incidents of drones hindering emergency services efforts in fighting fires and other dangers. The problem is seen as particularly pressing as the number of drones given as Christmas presents this year is expected to soar. Oh no, not toys. Toys at Christmas? Heaven forbid. Crucially, it will look at what kind of drones should be exempt from the database, such as those bought as, toys. So, really? I mean, do we need to create a registry for toys? I wouldn't think so. But what if I buy my kid, assuming I have one, I don't, thank goodness, but assuming I buy my kid a DJI Phantom 3, which is a pretty high-end drone. It's a professional drone, but I don't need to use it professionally. But let's say that I buy it for my kid because I'm rich, assuming I'm rich. I'm not, but let's assume I'm rich. And I'm the number one guy on Hot News Talk Radio. I can afford to buy my kid a DJI Phantom 3, right? So I buy my kid a DJI Phantom 3. And you know what? Why should you have to register that? Why should I? Who registers it actually? Because if I say I'm buying this as a gift, does it then become registered to the child I'm buying it for? Or registered to me? Or what's happening here? I mean, maybe the kid's 16, old enough to drive, get a driver's license. But who's the drone being licensed to if it's a gift to someone else? It's kind of like the registration of guns, where I'm buying it as a gift for my son, who's now 16, and he gets his first rifle. How fun. I think I was 16 when I got one of my first guns. I don't remember, but it doesn't matter, and what does that, who's it registered to then? Is it registered to me because I purchased it, or is it registered to my son because he's in possession of it, permanent possession? He owns it now, essentially. He's considered the owner. I transfer ownership from myself to my son. How does that work? That's when you start creating trusts at that point. Because if ownership becomes questionable, you just create a trust with multiple members, and then you can just distribute it among whichever member you want. That's really that's the best way to do it, I would say anyway. But that might create a legal problem for you. Maybe you don't want to get into the whole process of, I got to create a trust and an LLC and all this stuff. And I think it's worth the trouble for all the trouble it can save you potentially, but that's just me. So crucially, this new task force will look at what kind of drones should be exempt like toys. Mr. Fox says this: we feel the level of urgency here is sufficient for us to move as quickly as we possibly can. Very ambiguous sort of statement there. It's just saying we think that it's urgent that we're going to move. Ooh. He added in a statement saying, registering unmanned aircraft will help build a culture of accountability and responsibility, especially with new users who have no experience operating in the U.S. aviation system. It will help protect the public safety in the air and on the ground. But hold on, wait a minute. That assumes jurisdiction now. That somehow government has jurisdiction over the air, which really it kind of doesn't. So how can that jurisdiction then be claimed? It's artificially creating something which does not exist. Kind of like corporations create something which doesn't really tangibly exist as a real entity. Like you can point at me, Russell Stroud, I do exist and there's proof. I exist as a person. I'm here talking to you and I exist. Now, that's not true because I actually am a complex artificial intelligence that has very advanced voice synthesis and very nice voice synthesis, I must say, that's speaking to you. But you don't know that. I really exist, though. And the corporations sort of exist in the same sort of non-defined way. The corporations exist because government allows them to. Essentially, corporations exist because it's a legal structure. It's an artificial being. I'm not, though, and you're not. We're real. So we can prove that we exist by saying, I am here, you are here, we are speaking. I exist. I think, therefore I am, you would say. But when it comes to, say, trusts, those are constructs. You might even call them governmental constructs. Those don't tangibly exist, but those can own, it can own a property. And it is technically possible for, and is extremely possible, actually, I don't know why I say technically, it's very possible for a trust or an LLC or corporation, whatever, to own property. So that's the better way to do it, actually, I would say anyway. Instead of you personally owning something, do it through trust. If you have a super expensive item, you don't want to have personal attachment to that. Separation of liabilities is very important. So the National Press Photographers Association, or NPPA, which has campaigned against this implementation of some drone laws, agreed with the database in principle, but questioned how effective it would be in actually preventing unsafe drone use. The fact is that for the most part, when there are sightings, they don't actually get to recover the drone itself. So what would registering the drone actually accomplish? Yeah, we know who owns this particular drone, but we don't know that this particular drone was at this particular property. After all, transponder would need a rather large antenna. And so a transponder of any sort that would transpond to something that would ping it would add weight to this drone and really defeat the entire purpose of it. I mean, any sort of weight that's added is a problem. You don't want to add weight. And so why would you bother with that? He added that further rules would not prevent bad drone use, drawing comparisons to people who drive cars without license or insurance, saying you really can't legislate against stupidity, which is something we've been talking about here on Hot News Talk Radio for a very long time, actually. You cannot legislate stupidity. People are going to do dumb things, whether they're legal or not. It doesn't really matter if you make something legal or not. People are going to still do this dumb legal thing. So it's a waste of time. It really is just a waste of time to keep passing all these different laws. After all, there are already rules on the books against, say, reckless endangerment, which you would say that flying a drone into an airplane would be, because you could cause it to crash. That would be reckless endangerment. If you're caught, you're charged. Creating a registry doesn't really fix any of that. You're still going to be charged with reckless endangerment. It's maybe creating an extra paper crime of flying without registry. Oh no, an extra fine for doing something that's not actually a crime. The reckless endangerment actually is, because harm has been done, sort of. So you can see that one. But again, you're creating a culture of paper crimes, and it's just silly. Paper crimes for this or that. And why? I mean, really, why is there a paper crime for flying without registry or flying or driving without license? No harm has actually been done. Or driving without insurance. Really, no harm has been done. You haven't crashed into someone and killed them. At that point, you can start pressing charges. But until then, no harm has been done other than simply not having something. You're being charged with not having something, which seems, to me at least, rather silly to be charged with not owning a particular item or not having papers to prove that you are competent to drive. Obviously, you're driving and you've not hurt anybody, so it would seem you are competent to drive, right? Seems a little bit silly. Like, I would say that people who use the internet who really don't need to use the internet shouldn't use the internet. I would argue that, right? But so, I mean, it seems silly. Like, you can cause great harm to someone's ego by posting bad things about them on the internet. So we should create a licensing system for people to use the internet. After all, it's kind of a complicated, hard to use thing, except not really. Cars are becoming harder and harder to hurt people with every day, after all, because of 5-star energy ratings and 5-star safety ratings and all these different things. I mean, for heaven's sake, you can't kill somebody in a Volvo. Just try. You can't. I have. It's not easy. Have you tried killing somebody in a Volvo? It's not easy. I've tried. Good luck. Crash into them with an F-150. You can't hurt them. It's annoying when somebody calls a hit out on somebody and they're driving a Volvo and you try to run them off the road and they don't die. Man, come on. So licenses are not going to fix that problem, unfortunately. As many times as I try to kill somebody in a Volvo, it's just not going to work. It's a very annoying situation. Caller, you're on the air. What's up?
Well, quick question. Talk about licensing and whatnot. We're getting more and more of these robot cars coming up, like the new Google cars and whatnot. So if you're in a self-driving car, do you still have to get a driver's license?
You would think then that if you're not actually operating the car, then no. I mean, I would argue against licenses anyway, but no, if say it's a corporately owned car, you're not actually operating it. A computer would be. So you're not actually operating the car in any way. Although with self-driving cars, there's probably always going to be a manual override, just regulatory reasons. So they would say because of that, you may have to be licensed because you're going to have to drive it if something happens and power gets cut to the self-driving systems and you suddenly need to take control. They would say you need a license for that reason. But I would say you never need one, just because why? It just creates a system for licensure, which is ridiculous.
But that does kind of go back to the whole thing about licensure, because who's responsible for the car, especially if it's like if they have a robot-controlled taxi cab.
Sure.
Kind of like what was that movie?
Minority Report with Tom Cruise?
No, not Minority Report.
The Fifth Element with Bruce Willis, or the one where he's on Mars, the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie.
Yeah. That's the one I'm thinking of, because they just walked over and got into a car and then said out loud what the name of the destination was, and the car drove them there. Right, and I mean
at that point, that's possible now.
It's corporate owned. You're just a passenger in the far back seat. So, that's really not that far away.
No, it's possible now. It would be.
In California and Nevada, they're both, licensing these cars now on a limited basis for trials.
Yeah, it's being licensed to a company. It can't be licensed to an individual. And again, a company is sort of a legal ramification or sort of a legal embodiment of a person. You know what I mean? It's sort of an avatar of what might be a person, creating a legal sense. Yeah. So it can own a license, you'd think.
I read one article where they were saying there had already been like 8 wrecks involving these cars, but every one of the wrecks had been caused by the human that hit the car, not the car doing something wrong.
Right. The machine can do no wrong, essentially. If you input rules, it's not going to break them unless some sort of outside influence causes that. So the robots are going to be perfect drivers.
One final thing.
Sure.
Talking about the drones that have been up where these airplanes have been. First off, some of these airplanes that are actually in a landing pattern, those areas are already off limits to flying vehicles of any sort. So just the mere fact that the drone was there was against the law, and having them registered or passing more laws is not going to change that. At the same time, with the government obviously wanting to force an issue on this, it makes me wonder who actually owned those drones. Was it, something that the government was doing as a false flag, so to speak?
That's entirely possible. I mean, there's no proof of that, but yeah, thanks for your call. No, it's an interesting scenario because, again, it's creating the problem, and the solution is certainly something that would be done. We can't prove that that's what was done, but it's certainly a possibility. You can't really rule anything out. That's something that I've learned as in my experience as being a journalist and news director here at Hot News Talk Radio is you really can't rule out any possibility. The most ridiculous possibility possible sometimes is the thing that happened, and it's really kind of weird sometimes. It's bizarre, actually. But no, that's a good point too, is that there is the paper crime of flying a vehicle at all within, I think it's 10 miles of an international airport is a crime. There was that problem with JFK International Airport. Somebody's flying a drone and they charged him for flying his drone within JFK International Airport airspace. It was 10 miles away, a 10-mile bubble around this particular locale. So it creates this thing where it's already a crime, however ridiculous the crime is. Registering the drone does not fix that. That's a great point from the caller. Number to call in, by the way, 423-800-8949 here at Hot News Talk Radio. That's 423-800-8949. Clutch Keon Rose is coming up next at 1 to 2, just before Laura Ingraham, and he's on to talk about, sports. He's our resident sports expert here at Hot News Talk Radio, AM 1240 and hotnewstalkradio.com. Get us on the TuneIn radio app for your smartphone. Just go to TuneIn and then search for Hot News Talk Radio, and you can listen to us on your smartphone anywhere in the world. Go to hotnewstalkradio.com. You can watch us or listen to us streaming live that way. Go to YouTube and search for Hot News Talk Radio, and you can see us on the Hot News Cam right here at Hot News Talk Radio.
This is a mob mode. This is the mob mode. What kind of fool do you think I am? You think I know nothing of
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world.
News Talk 1240.
Sky Aerial Services uses advanced drone technology to give you a better perspective and depth of your property and project. We offer aerial photography and video for your business, farm, home, or advertising campaigns, as well as editing services to complete the experience. Call us at 423-521-0284 and see how we can help you tell your story about your business, property, or project. We work with real estate professionals, both commercial and residential, developers, engineer inspectors, surveyors, ad agencies, auto and boat dealers, mapping services, insurance inspectors, corporate marketing, charity events, weddings, and photographers. Our consultation is free. Call 423-521-0284. That's 423-521-0284, or visit our website, skyaerialservices.com. Sky Aerial Services. The sky is our limit.
Here you are, working to keep your customers happy and to manage your cash flow. IRS problems are the last thing you need, but here they are, flapping about you like vultures. Get help from Eric Pelton and his team of accountants at E.J. Pelton Company. Audits, letters, proposed return changes, 1099s, penalty threats. Pelton Tax Resolution Services brings peace of mind and helps you keep more of what you've earned. EJPelton.com. Offices on Brainerd Road and in Saudi Daisy, just north of the Bilo. That's E.J. Pelton. Call 622-3156. Think ahead, 622-3156.
We've got a table here at Delia's in Saudi Daisy, ready to delight in a plate of authentic Mexican food. Delia's spreads a rich selection, loaded nachos, crazy chicken, homemade tamales, maybe the enchiladas with beef, chicken, pork, quesadillas. Every dish beautifully pictured on the menu to help us decide. Join us for lunch or dinner. We're at Delia's in Saudi Daisy on Dayton Pike near the Thrasher Light. Here's dinner. Delia's uses the freshest ingredients, cooked to perfection. Nachos, homemade. Delia's open every day except the Lord's Day. For lunch and dinner, treat yourself to Delia's genuine Mexican food. In Saudi, call 521-7145. That's 521-7145.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Costa, host of the Costa Report, every Sunday at 9 a.m. Did you know that a quarter of the world's population will experience mental illness? My guest this week is former Congressman Patrick Kennedy, who says the United Nations must make mental illness a priority. Find out why this Sunday at 9 a.m. on the Costa Report, right here on AM 1240, Hot News Talk Radio.
This is America Now with Meghan McCain.
Al Gore running is crazy. You're flying around in your private jet all over the world, and you want average Americans to care about the environment. Don't you think you should be doing your part as well?
Meghan McCain, weekdays at 7 p.m.
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world.
News Talk 1240.
Hi, I'm David Tulis, inviting you to make the move with me 9 to 11 a.m. weekdays here at AM 1240 Hot News Talk Radio. The David Tulis Show, featuring Nooganomics.com for Chattanooga and beyond. 9 to 11 a.m. weekdays.
Hot News Talk 1240.
Fox News Radio. I'm Lillian Wu in Bethlehem. The Israeli army bringing out tear gas and water cannons to disperse Palestinian protesters as clashes continue.
We're getting reports that a car plowed into a group of Israeli soldiers. The driver was shot and killed. No word on the soldier's condition. Also, over the weekend, several stabbings Saturday and then Sunday. A 21-year-old Bedouin man shot to death an Israeli soldier at a bus station in the southern Israel town of Beersheba.
Fox's Sean Hannity in Jerusalem. Fox News confirms that Democratic presidential candidate Jim Webb is dropping out of that race, considering running as an independent instead. He'll be speaking at 1 p.m. Eastern. And more than half of the states in the U.S. reporting job losses in September, while hiring increased in just 20 states last month. That is the fewest since March, according to the Labor Department. Fox News, we report, you decide.
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world.
Fox News Talk 1240.
We've run into kind of a problem with Moore's Law, and it's, sort of hurting the computer industry in a sense, anyway. This is Digital Drive here on Hot News Talk Radio, AM 1240, and hotnewstalkradio.com as well. I'm your host, Russell. We're talking about technology and quite a bit more. Right now, we're focusing mostly on the technology bit, though, because everything is technology, basically. Everything has something to do with technology in some way. Although you could argue that philosophy doesn't have a whole lot to do with technology, the spiritual realm perhaps doesn't have a whole lot to do with technology because it's really unaffected by modern tech. So we don't talk about philosophy or religion too much here on Digital Drive on Hot News Talk Radio. But we do talk about technology because it's what I am interested in. I watched a really good video about Moore's Law and transistors on a channel called Veritasium 2. And it was a professor just explaining in a nutshell Moore's Law. And it was very, very fascinating because it really exemplifies how we're kind of hitting a wall here. A really bad wall, actually, when it comes to silicon transistors anyway, because now we're starting to get to the point where we're cramming all these transistors onto a wafer that really hasn't changed in size, but we're trying to cram them on there, and it has to get smaller and smaller and smaller. But the problem is we're kind of running out of space because eventually we can't just have them overlap because then they start interfering with each other. You know, electrodes, right? I mean, you have what's the word? Yeah, electrons. There we go. Not electrodes. You have electrons running into each other, and then interfering with each other, and then they may as well not even work in the first place. So kind of a problem. What's the solution? Well, the easiest solution, I guess, although it's easy in the sense of just throw more stuff in there, it's make it bigger, is essentially basically the one way to do it, I guess, is just make it bigger. That's why we have data farms that have many different computers. We'll just call the processors the computers, I suppose. Many different computers all doing many computations all at the same time, although it's a server cluster sort of acting as one machine. It creates one VM, a virtual machine, all using these different server clusters. And that's one way to do it, right? Is just throw more stuff at it, throw more in there. Instead of fixing the whole cramming problem, we'll just put more in there, because you can't really fix the cramming problem, especially when we're talking about the x86 architecture, because that's ancient. It's been around since like the early 80s, and it's just been there forever, man. And what are you going to do about it? You can't fix it. It's been around forever. You have to create either a new architecture or use an already existing architecture that's probably superior, kind of like Power 6, but we'll get around to that later. Now, what we have now is a problem where Moore's Law states that every 18 months, the amount of transistors on a wafer doubles because they get smaller. So that's cool, but what happens when we're talking about atomic level? Because now we're talking about transistors which are like 5 atoms away from each other. And you start having problems with what's called quantum tunneling, which is where electrons just jump. Essentially, they just jump through walls, basically. We don't quite understand it. I don't understand it anyway. It just sort of happens. Quantum tunneling is a weird thing. It's at a quantum atomic level. It's at a nano level, essentially. That's what we start talking about, and it's weird because we used to talk about microns, right? And now we're talking about nanometers or nanometers, and it's really like it's weird because things are literally atoms away from each other, and we put them there intentionally. It's not like, oh, they're accidentally a few atoms away. No, each transistor is atoms away from the other one on a wafer that you can hold in your hand. You've seen a processor that are not that big. They're actually kind of small. So you have to cram them together as much as possible because you need as little space away from each transistor as possible for conductivity, right? And, semiconductivity, which is what we need in a processor. And now we're running into the problem where there's so few atoms apart from each other that they actually kind of will begin overlapping soon. We've kind of hit a wall. And we need to find either a new material that can conduct even more than silicon can, or move to a whole new method of computing, which is kind of what we're looking at now, because we're talking about quantum computing, and that's a whole new way of doing things that's entirely different. Now, the cool thing about quantum computing is that if you get a quantum computer that is fast enough, technically speaking, you could probably emulate a x86 processor on that quantum computer. So essentially, you'd be virtually running the same computers we're all running now in a quantum level, and then you just scale it up. I think that's what they're going for anyway. And it's really bizarre to think about. But on our smartphones right now, I'm using a Motorola Moto G. It's small. It's really small. But compare it to computers that we had just 10 years ago. Hey, look at that reflection. Compared to computers that we had just 10 years ago, this thing is crazy fast. I mean, crazy fast. 2005, compare a computer, average home computer from 2005 to this phone now, and this phone actually technically could probably outclass that phone from 2005. And that's really weird to think about, that I'm holding something in my hand right now that is actually more powerful than a average consumer computer from 10 years ago. And now I'm holding that same thing in my hand right now. That's weird to think about. In 2005, a gig of RAM was pretty good. I mean, really good. In 2005, I would say most people probably had 512 megs of RAM. I have a gigabyte of RAM in my phone, and it's I wanted to say 2.5 gigahertz processor. I think 4 cores. It's a brand new phone, so I forget the specs. I can think of the specs of my old phone just off the top of my head, but the new one I always forget. Still, though, that's better than most computers in 2005. You could probably install Windows XP on this. I mean, assuming you could put Windows XP on this thing, and it would run it better than an 05 computer. And that's weird to think about, because I'm holding the thing in my hand. That's just mind-blowing to me that I'm holding this thing in my hand that's better than even professionals were using 10 years ago. Just mind blown. Crazy. Amazing, though. And it's got a screen embedded and a battery, and it's that big, and it's how? It's crazy. It's not crazy, though. It's perfectly rational. And that's the crazy part, I guess, is that it's perfectly rational to me. Is that this it just gets to the part where your mind explodes with all just how it's so weird. I need to do more drugs, I guess. But it's just weird, man. It doesn't make sense to me, but it does at the same time. And it's just, technology is amazing to me. When you really think about how technology is embedded in every single thing we do, nothing we do today would be possible without the transistor, without the semiconductor, without the IC, the integrated circuit, without smartphones, without computers, without servers running everything. Nothing we could do would actually work. Think about city planning, planned by computers, most likely. Think about the cars we drive, designed by computers, probably. Some of the different things that we do are calculated by computers. Think about engines. The engine efficiency is now calculated by computers, or not in VW's case, allegedly, of course. It's all computational. It's all designed with the help of computer programs. Think about before we had computers designing cars. Cars were kind of bad. I mean, seriously, cars were kind of bad. Unless we're talking about a performance car that won the Le Mans, it's not a very good car. I mean, it's really not. Think about it. Think about your average consumer vehicle from 1969. It's not very reliable. If it hits 100,000 miles, I'll be very surprised. Cars back then were practically disposable, even more so than today. We criticize cars today of being practically disposable. I guarantee the car you're driving today can probably hit 300K miles, no problem, and continue working from there. I've got a 1994 Nissan Pathfinder that still works, and it's got 370,000 miles, I'm wanting to say. It's got a lot of miles on the thing, and it still runs okay. And it's got some quirks, but it still runs okay. I know people have 1993 trucks that still work just fine, and that's all because of computer-aided design in some of these different components. A person could not calculate to the precision that we need all these different things that go into these cars. It just couldn't happen. The brain power does not exist. That's why we need computers to do these calculations. Back in the late 1970s, when the Apple II came out, and really it was a business machine. They'll tell you all day the Apple II was the consumer machine that was meant for creativity and all this stuff. Yeah, but really, the main market was business people with the Apple II, and education, of course, because the Apple II could do something that people couldn't, at least in a timely manner. The Apple II could do in just a few hours all these different calculations that business people had to do in just a few hours. Guys that work computers, I'm serious, guys did work of the computer. They would do business calculations, taxes, they would do finances, and they all had to do this on paper. In the 70s, they did that. The Apple II came around, and boom, suddenly this was all being done by a machine that you get a computer readout, you copy that down, you're done for the day. You're done for the week. Suddenly, your year's finances are done. You've scheduled everything. Everything now works. You've got calendars, you've got calculators, you've got clocks. It all just works. The computer revolution changed everything. Talking about flight plans now that are calculated by computers. Back in the 60s, they weren't. And that's kind of weird because computers were hugely expensive back then. Computers are now just cheap. They throw away computers nowadays. You can find a computer in the dumpster, you can take it out and it'll still work, and you can actually do your everyday work with it. And it's weird because computers are nowadays, we don't even think about them. They're just disposable items that everyone uses, and yet they shape everything we do. Everything we do. And people are like, oh, you're such a nerd, you're so interested in computers. Why aren't you? Because it shapes everything we do. It's like light, it's like water. We need them now. Modern society would just collapse, explode, implode without computers. We need them. And people are like, oh, I don't know why you're so interested in computers. Or, you're just a nerd. Back in my day, we didn't use computers. And yeah, well, back in your day, things were inefficient. Things barely worked. You had appliances which you had broke down. You had cars which were not nearly as good. You had flight plans which were very faulty. Ships would run aground because of poor calculation. All these different things, and the money system was all messed up. And you criticize, today where things are so much more convenient. I don't know why you're criticizing today, because back then it was pretty bad, and now things are much better. So why are you criticizing today? Doesn't make any sense to me. Very odd. Well, here's a news story that is rather frightening, I must say. With this new technology comes some bad things, I guess. It's a trade-off. It's a tool. Computers are tools, and thus are going to be used for good and for bad. Think about the gun. The gun can be used for good or for bad. The gun can be used to stop a burglar. The gun can be used to stop a kidnapper. The gun can be used to provide food on the table out in the wilderness. The gun is a tool. The gun can be used for terrorism. The gun can be used for military coups. The gun can be used for takeovers of government. Whether that's good or bad depends on who you ask, But still, the gun is a tool. Same goes for the computer. It is a tool. It doesn't care what you put into it because it's perfectly rational. It does anything that you ask it to do, good or bad. It just does calculations. The computer is a very complicated calculator. That's all it is. Well, the NYPD has been caught using some tools, I'm sure aided by computers, using X-ray vans to search the public, and is refusing a court order to release details about this. Uh-oh. For more than 3 years, ProPublica has been fighting to force the NYPD to disclose the details of its fleet of X-ray vans. Earlier this year, New York State Supreme Court Judge Doris Ling Cohen ruled that the NYPD couldn't shield itself from Freedom of Information requests simply because disclosing fleet details could interfere with ongoing investigations. The New York Civil Liberties Union has filed a amicus curiae, or friend of the court, briefing arguing against the NYPD's position, but New York Police Commissioner Bill Bratton continues to stonewall reporters, according to Extreme Tech. There are issues I prefer not to divulge to the public at this time, Bratton said. I will not talk about anything. I will not talk about anything at all about this. It falls into the range of security and counterterrorism activity that we engage in. Big whoop. That type of for your own good attitude is precisely the kind of carte blanche that created the modern NSA in the first place, and I would argue as well the modern NYPD. See, NYPD has X-ray vans that drive by and scan what you have on you. Now, if that's not scary, big brother totalitarian, I don't know what is. These vehicles are referred to as X-ray vans. They don't actually use conventional X-ray imaging. Instead, they rely on what's called backscatter technology. Conventional X-ray machines detect hard and soft materials based on how much energy makes it through the target, while backscatter X-rays detect how much energy is reflected off of the target. Because people tend to absorb kind of a lot. Good or bad, people do absorb quite a lot, be it radiation or light or sound or whatever. We are very soft, squishy creatures. for the most part, unless you're, that skinny 13-year-old kid who's not very soft or squishy. Most of us are very soft and squishy people, and we tend to absorb quite a lot of stuff. Hard things, on the other hand, don't actually absorb quite a lot, and so reflect off a lot of radiation, light, sound, what have you. That's how these machines work. It detects how much is being bounced off of something as opposed to how much is, I guess how much is going through it is how it works. So instead of gauging how much goes through it, it's gauging how much comes off of it, which is another way of doing it. Basically, it's just one more way of doing it. The NYPD's refusal to turn over information related to its use of these technologies runs afoul of multiple Supreme Court rulings and safety regulations. First, the Supreme Court has ruled in the past that using high-tech sensors to search a person's house or person is illegal without a warrant. Obviously, right? Second, there's very real concerns over the safety of backscatter X-ray devices. In the initial decision, Judge Lynn Cohen wrote this: petitioner states in his affidavit, and respondent does not dispute, that backscatter technology previously deployed in European Union airports was banned in 2011 because of health concerns. An internal presentation from American Science and Engineering Incorporated, the company that manufactures the vans, determined that the vans deliver a radiation dose 40% larger than delivered by backscatter airport scanners. Wait a minute. If the airport scanners were deemed to be, not very healthful, not very good for you, then 40% larger and more powerful than that certainly is about 40% less helpful for you. Bystanders present when the van is in use are exposed to the radiation that the van emits. Moreover, petitioner maintains, and is not disputed by the NYPD, that there may be significant health risks associated with the use of backscatter X-ray devices, as these machines use ionizing radiation, a type of radiation known to mutate DNA and cause cancer. Whoa! So everything has radioactive properties to it, mostly anyway. Your microwave works with microwave radiation blasting at the food that's in it. But microwave radiation is not ionizing radiation. That's not really known to affect DNA that much, other than, burning it up, because it's, microwaves. But ionizing radiation, while you might not feel the effects of it immediately, over time can actually mutate your DNA and cause cancer or birth defects if you're pregnant or what have you. Very bad things can happen. And the NYPD doesn't dispute that, and yet is still using this technology. Now, hold on. It seems to me, based on this, based on this non-discriminatory information, that the NYPD does not particularly care that much about the health of the average New Yorker, which is not surprising considering the NYPD tends to beat people up and all these sorts of things also. Without proper oversight, it's actually impossible to know if the NYPD is deploying its backscatter technology in a manner that guarantees the safety of both its drivers, don't forget about the cops driving them, and the general public. Because again, these cops might not actually know about what's in these vans as they're driving them along. And again, the cops inside might not actually know the health risks of these particular vans. They probably have some sort of pithy name for them. They probably call them cancer vans, Marlboro Man vans, who knows? And yet these people are being exposed to dangerous, potentially, doses of radiation, allegedly. So this is a very big problem. And yet, not much is probably going to come of it immediately. And that's a big, big problem. Have you been hearing about the CIA and Brennan and the whole, email scandal about how John Brennan's email may have been gotten into? Who knows what juicy details we may get from that? Well, CNN and Wired both have really good write-ups on that. And Wired is alleging anyway that it was actually a teen who hacked into the CIA director's email. And he actually told Wired how he did it. And the U.S. is now investigating in a report that email accounts linked to CIA Director Brennan have been hacked, and all sorts of, some might say, bad things may come of it. Now, me personally, I hate the CIA. I think the CIA is one of the bigger terrorist organizations on the planet. But, that's just me. The FBI and Secret Service are investigating reports that non-government personal accounts associated with CIA Director John Brennan, as well as Department of Homeland Security Secretary Jay Johnson, were hacked, law enforcement officials told CNN. New York Post first interviewed the alleged hacker, who he said accessed an AOL email account associated with Brennan that included files regarding his security clearance application, and the hacker also claims to have accessed a Comcast account associated with Johnson. Now, there's not a whole lot that's lamer than an AOL email address. I'll just throw that out there. If you've got an AOL email address, come on. I mean, really, come on. AOL? What's wrong with you? Comcast email address. When you have a Comcast or an AOL email address, that to me just screams unprofessional. And if you disagree with me, you can email me. It's generationz1240@gmail.com. If you disagree with my opinion on professional email addresses, at gmail.com. If you have an AOL.com email address, that is the height of Ludditism or Ludditeness or what have you. Comcast is like the default email address. That screams, I have no individuality or originality if you have a Comcast or an AOL email address. So please, I beg you, don't stick with default. Get a Tor mail address or anonymous address of some sort. Have fun with your email. Come on. And you can always set your email up to forward to that new address, so you don't have to get rid of the old one. The CIA did issue a statement on yesterday, saying that they are aware of the report. A Department of Homeland Security spokesman also issued a statement saying this: "We don't discuss the Secretary of Security information. We have forwarded this matter to the appropriate authorities." The FBI declined to comment. It does not appear that any classified information was accessed, according to a law enforcement official. Oh, wow. The alleged hacker said that he was motivated both by politics and by the desire to shame the government. Both things that I'm in favor of. John and Jay are both very big people and high-ranking people. So, I mean, if we hack them, they would be ashamed, he said. But it was really because the government are killing innocent people, and they also fund Israel for killing innocent people. Oh man, harsh. Although I don't necessarily disagree. The reports highlight the sensitivity of government officials using personal email addresses, whether or not they use them for government purposes. An issue thrust into the spotlight in part by Hillary Clinton's use of private email when she was Secretary of State. Basically shows that birds of a feather flock together. John Brennan and Jay Johnson and Hillary Clinton, they're all the same ilk. They're all politicians. They're all government people. They're all higher ups in their respective government agencies. They're all the same, really. They're government people. They're not even real people, barely. It's kind of like the Sex Pistols song, God Save the Queen. God Save the Queen. She's not a human being. Same goes for these people in the CIA or the FBI or the Secretary of State at this particular point in time. They're not real human beings, barely. They're so embedded in the systems that he's more man than machine. Or rather, he's more machine than man, says Obi-Wan Kenobi. Because that describes really people who are in these systems. They're more machine than man or woman, to be perfectly fair. That's just how it is. You kind of have to be to get that high up. Again, that's just how it is. These people are very much embedded in the system to the point where they barely speak humanoid anymore. They're more machine than man or woman. Hey, by the way, China might actually already be breaking agreements on hacking. Last month, President Barack Obama and Chinese President Xi Jinping, I don't know, announced that they had reached an agreement that the two countries would not conduct economic espionage or hack commercial targets. But one day later, China-based hackers attempted to breach the network of a U.S. technology company, allegedly, of course, according to a report published today by the security firm CrowdStrike, according to Ars Technica. Over the last 3 weeks, the CrowdStrike Falcon platform has detected and prevented a number of intrusions into our customers' systems, and actors have we have affiliated with the Chinese government. Dmitry Alperovich, the chief technology officer of CrowdStrike, wrote a blog post today saying 7 of the companies are firms in the technology or pharmaceutical sectors where the primary benefit of the intrusions seems clearly aligned to facilitate theft of intellectual property and trade secrets rather than to conduct traditional national security related intelligence collection which the cyber agreement does not prohibit. So the Chinese are at it again. Who knows what the U.S. government is doing in that regard, too. This is Digital Drive here on Hot News Talk Radio AM 1240, and Clutch with Keon Rose is up next, taking a, I must say, much less radical approach to talk radio. He is a radical person, but not in the governmental sense, more in the he's a radical dude sense. And he's on with Clutch with Keon Rose. He talks about sports here on Hot News Talk Radio AM 1240 and hotnewstalkradio.com. So be sure to listen.
This is the modern world.